Serial killers. This phrase most likely tugged a strange, uncomfortable feeling into your chest, and your thoughts recognized it with words such as scary, creepy, insane, or dangerous. For me, however, I skip over this uncomfortable feeling and jump directly to curiosity. The unfathomable actions of these murderers has fascinated me for years, leading me to delve further into their psyche. From the definition presented in Zelda Knight's article, some thoughts on the psychological roots of the behavior of serial killers as narcissists and object relations perspective, serial killers are identified as a person who kills 3 or more people over a period of more than 30 days with a significant cooling off period. Though many researchers have proposed one reason as the driving force behind criminal behavior, additional psychologists cited in Knight's work have explained the reasons are based on a consolidation of physical, biological, and psychological factors. By studying the backgrounds of serial killers, including environmental factors, childhood events, personality traits, and genetic studies, an educated insight may be given into the psychology of these murderers. Though using the study of genetics to explain serial killers' actions is relatively new, it has proven to be an effective method of explaining murderous psychology. Louis Parchley's article, Can Your Genes Make You Kill?, presented a team of lawyers who defended a man who attempted to kill his wife and successfully killed her friend. This was the first capital murder case to use a genetic approach as a defense tactic. The lawyers requested the defendant's blood to be sent to a molecular genetics lab, where scientists found a gene variant on his X chromosome, the gene that codes the enzyme monoamine oxidase A, or MAOA. The job of MAOA is to break down neurotransmitters such as dopamine and serotonin in the brain. If the enzyme is unable to break down enough of these chemicals, it can cause a loss of impulse control, an increase in violent behavior, and extreme rage. To further prove the variant's legitimacy, a study was conducted on a family with violence extending back to the late 1800s. Each of the men in the family who had committed violent crimes was found with the same genetic mutation on their X chromosome. A significant portion of the women in the family also exhibited this gene, but did not commit violent crimes. This was a result of women having 2 X chromosomes, whereas men only have 1. Thus, a woman's second X chromosome can compensate for the genetic variant affecting the first, explaining why there is a greater number of male over female serial killers. Genetics can constitute a basis of violence, but many factors must combine to create a serial murderer. The most crucial times of psychological development occur during pre-oedipal childhood and rely on positive caretaker-infant relationships. According to Knight in Object Relations Perspective, the first task is for caretakers to delight in and encourage the infant's interests and spontaneous enjoyment. This interaction is the foundation for the infant's self-esteem. The second task is for caretakers to provide sufficient support for the child when negative effects are experienced so that the child can learn to cope in the future with painful feelings. If caretakers fail to complete these tasks, the infant begins a path of hostile aggression and destructive narcissism, according to Knight's article, Sexually Motivated Serial Killers and the Psychology of Aggression and Evil within a Contemporary Psychoanalytical Perspective. The only way for the child to compensate for the extreme lack of self-esteem is to create a facade of grandiosity and exhibitionism, meaning the child becomes narcissistic in order to make up for the absence of healthy self-image. Many children have troubled childhoods, but when the abuse continues into adulthood, criminals are born. As stated by Cassandra Simmons in Antisocial Personality Disorder in Serial Killers, The Thrill of the Kill, the intense rage of the serial killer may be a mirror of the horror suffered in childhood, and furthers that many families of serial killers have a history of criminal activity, drug abuse, and mental illnesses. Many serial killers will have relationships with their mothers suffused with abuse and sexual interest, as well as a lack of male role model, or a physically, sexually, or emotionally abusive father. The abuse these children experience leads to an increased risk of violence, social awkwardness, and sexual deviance. Simmons tells that it is repeatedly found that serial killers express malice toward animals as well as their peers during childhood and adolescence. When a normal teenager may go to dances, parties, and begin experimenting with their sexuality, the serial killer starts to have sexual fantasies that he or she cannot manage. The killer will begin with minor offenses, but as he or she continues to escalate their deviant sexual acts, a tolerance to them will also build. This will lead to severe rape, torture, mutilation, and murder, as the killer may only feel gratification through his or her victim's violation and humiliation. Childhood experiences not only create a person with extreme rage, but also chooses a killer's victimology. Knight, in Object Relations Perspective, explains serial killers unknowingly try to kill away their repressed childhood pain by symbolically killing someone that represents the object of their agony. Serial killers often have a distinct type of victim they choose. A 2004 study by Serge Moses Pakhomu described in Serial Killers, offenders' relationship to the victim and selected demographics, concluded that most serial killers are white males in their 20s and 30s of above average intelligence who usually commit interracial murders of strangers. Thus, the research determined that the white female victims were dominantly attacked by white men and the black female victims largely assaulted by black men. Knight discusses a viewpoint called Object Relations Perspective, noting that the object of a child's torture becomes a part of themselves that they cannot remove. The object of pain in a killer's childhood is one of three people: their maternal figure, paternal figure, or themselves. If the offender believes the maternal figure to be the main abuser, the killer will choose victims who represent their mother. If the killer blames the father for the pain suffered in childhood, the murderer will select victims who symbolically represent their paternal figure. When a serial killer preys on children, it is because the killer is symbolically killing themselves. Serial killers displace their anger on symbolic figures because they lose their grip on reality and fail to recognize the immorality of their actions. This extreme lack of empathy stems from antisocial personality disorder, a disorder which affects nearly all serial killers. Simmons explains that a killer will appear to be mentally stable as they will not suffer from delusions, hallucinations, or memory loss, but the offender will be unable to conform behavior to social norms, defer gratification, control impulses, tolerate frustration, profit from corrective experiences, or identify with others and form meaningful relationships with them. Simmons furthers the explanation, saying that individuals diagnosed with this disorder will exhibit no shame, remorse, or guilt for their actions. These claims are further proven in a study conducted by Kent Keel, an acclaimed psychologist on the neuroscience of psychopathy. Keel believes psychopathy, also modernly termed antisocial personality disorder, is rooted in defective limbic and paralimbic cortexes. To test his theory, inmates' brain activity was monitored while they were given phrases or pictures of moral offensiveness. When the test subjects were asked to react to these pictures, the difference between psychopathic and non-psychopathic inmates was distinguished. Keel's study determined that non-psychopaths will show activity in regions related to empathy and emotion, while psychopaths will be processing the information in a logical portion of the brain in order to produce an answer the psychopath believes is the correct or wanted answer, as phrased by Parsley. This explains why serial killers have often been described as seemingly normal, like when Rhonda Stapley, a survivor of Ted Bundy, described him as such in an interview recorded by Jeff Truesdell in A Ted Bundy Victim Speaks Escaping a Serial Killer. Ted looked like a typical university student. He had slightly curly brown hair, a nice complexion, and his smile was friendly and inviting. The chilling truth is, psychopaths are almost undetectable. Many qualities manufacture the basis of serial killers and their violent actions: genetics, pre-oedipal, oedipal, and adolescent experiences, the basic and specific victimology, psychological disorders, and brain development all merge to analyze, comprehend, and construct serial murderers. Attempting to intercept and prevent these killers before they can commence their murderous streak may be impossible presently, but the basis for understanding them has begun to fall into place. Serial killers are some of the most complex criminals known to date, but as researchers delve further into their psychology, genetics, and backgrounds, their mystique will evaporate and leave them exposed to their rightful apprehension. Thank you for listening.